Okay, this is our third video now, and we're looking at types of costs, and we're now going to look at marginal costs. So we began to consider marginal costs before, and marginal cost curves, and we looked at market failures. And we previously considered marginal costs in class when we were discussing the scenario with the cupcakes. So the marginal cost is the extra cost of producing one more unit. Say the extra cupcake or the extra box of biscuits. It's the rise in the total cost if we produce an extra unit. So the marginal cost is the total cost divided by the change in quantity. It's the delta total cost over the delta quantity. If we have a marginal cost example, and that's thinking of the biscuits, if we decide to make, say, another 1,000 boxes, and this costs us an extra £1,500, then the marginal cost here, as we can see, comes out at £1.50. Now the marginal costs only reflect the variable costs, because the fixed costs don't actually change in the short run, and this marginal cost concept only applies in terms of the short run, and it only occurs over a period of time when some of the costs are fixed. If we actually put some of the marginal costs and diminishing returns together, we can actually begin to look at the law of diminishing returns. Now initially, as more people work on the farm, the variable costs rise and the total output rises, so that additional units cost less than previous units. The machinery is used more efficiently. And if we think of diminishing returns, if you remember that when we increase our staff from 1 to 2, production doubles, but as workers are added, the additional increase in production becomes smaller and smaller, eventually trailing away. And we would expect to see, as we increase inputs and produce more, or see some of our outputs rise, that the cost for each new unit of output starts to increase, and that's because of the law of diminishing returns. So here again you see, as the productions continue to rise in the short term, this actually represents the notion of the diminishing returns. So we can see the connection between marginal costs, the cost per additional unit of output, and the diminishing return. So initially the marginal costs fall before we see the impact of these diminishing returns. As we actually increase our inputs, increase our labour, we see these fall, so we can produce more. But as the law of diminishing returns kick in, we actually see that marginal costs start to rise again. And we've got here a marginal cost curve. Now we can see from the graph the characteristics of this U-shape of the cost curve. And as we actually see the quantity and the cost reducing, we can see that the fall represented cost of production of outputs, and then again here we can see it rising, and we can see as this continues as the law of diminishing returns. So on the marginal cost curve, the shape is determined by the law of diminishing returns, and initially greater production, more variable input, leads to a fall in the marginal cost. But at some point the marginal costs increase as the returns start to diminish. And at that point we need to decide if we want to change some of our fixed inputs, and that's where we move from our short run to our long run.